They said it was a routine security check. But routine checks don't end with a woman in handcuffs, standing barefoot in the aisle of first class, while hundreds of passengers stare in silence. She wasn't loud. She wasn't disruptive. She had a confirmed ticket, a platinum status badge, and a portfolio worth billions. Yet within minutes of boarding, security surrounded her seat, questioned her identity, and escorted her off the plane like she didn't belong there. Some passengers pulled out their phones. Others looked away. What no one realized in that moment was that the woman being removed wasn't just a traveler. She was the reason the airline was about to face the most expensive mistake in its history. But this isn't just a story about money. It's about power, perception, and what happens when prejudice collides with influence. Because by the time this flight was ready for takeoff, the real turbulence hadn't even begun. For most of her life, she had learned how to move through rooms where no one expected her to lead. Then the question that shifted everything: are you sure you're in the right seat? It wasn't confusion. It wasn't a mistake. It was disbelief. She looked at the seat number. First class. Window. Exactly what she paid for. Exactly what she earned. A few passengers began watching openly now. A man across the aisle leaned forward. A woman 2 rows back lifted her phone, pretending to text. The officer's voice hardened. There had been a concern. A report. Someone felt uncomfortable. Uncomfortable with what? Her presence? Her silence? Her skin? She could feel it happening in real time, the shift from respected executive to suspected intruder. The quiet rewriting of her identity right there in row 2A. She explained she was a frequent flyer. She mentioned her status. She kept her tone even. But explanations didn't matter anymore. The decision had already been made before the first question was asked. She built her company from a cramped apartment with 2 employees and a borrowed laptop. Years later, she was the founder and CEO of a global investment firm managing billions in infrastructure, tech, and transportation deals. Governments took her calls. Fortune 500 executives waited for her approval. Her decisions shaped industries. But none of that came easily. She had mastered boardrooms where she was the only black woman at the table. She memorized numbers twice as hard, prepared twice as long, and carried herself with a calm confidence that made doubt look foolish. In public, she was composed and precise. In private, she carried the quiet exhaustion of always having to prove she belonged. That morning, she was flying out for what should have been a routine trip, another high-level meeting, another negotiation involving major airline investments. Ironically, her firm was in the middle of reviewing a multi-billion-dollar funding expansion tied directly to the aviation industry. She arrived early. First-class ticket. Platinum status. Tailored suit. Everything in order. But as she settled into her seat, she felt it, that familiar shift in the air. The lingering glance. The whisper that lasted a second too long. The subtle tension she had learned never to ignore. She had faced skepticism before. She just didn't know that this time it wouldn't stay subtle. The flight attendants had barely finished greeting passengers when 2 uniformed security officers stepped into the aisle. At first, no one thought much of it. Airports were full of uniforms, full of procedures, full of routine checks. But they weren't scanning the cabin. They were walking straight toward her. Their pace was steady. Intentional. One stopped beside her seat. The other stood just behind him, blocking the aisle. Conversations around her quieted, like the air had been pulled from the cabin. Her name was asked. Then asked again. Not politely. Not discreetly. Loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. She handed over her boarding pass. Her ID. Calm. Controlled. The same composure she used in high-stakes negotiations. The documents were scanned, examined, held just a little longer than necessary. A pause. They asked her to stand. Not suggested. Not requested. Told. The cabin grew still as she rose to her feet. The officer gestured toward the aisle. People avoided eye contact now. A few stared openly, hungry for spectacle. No one intervened. She felt the weight of humiliation pressing against her chest, but she refused to let it show. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her unravel. As she stepped into the aisle, she caught fragments of whispers. Maybe she's in the wrong section. They wouldn't do this without a reason. That was the cruelest part. The automatic assumption that authority must be right. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A calendar reminder flashed across the screen. Aviation funding review, final approval pending. $5 billion. Her firm's capital. Capital that was scheduled to expand routes, modernize fleets, and stabilize struggling airline stocks. The same industry now escorting her off a plane as if she didn't belong on it. The officers guided her toward the exit. Each step felt slower than the last. Cameras were visible now. Passengers recording. A flight attendant avoiding her gaze. Right before she crossed the aircraft door, she turned back for half a second. Not in defeat. In clarity. Because in that moment, something shifted inside her. The humiliation didn't disappear, but it transformed. Hardened. Focused. Security believed they were removing a passenger. They had no idea they were walking a decision-maker off their own financial lifeline. The aircraft door closed behind her with a hollow thud. Inside, the cabin prepared for departure. Outside, she stood alone in the jet bridge, flanked by security like a threat that had been successfully contained. Her heels echoed against the floor as they led her back toward the terminal. No apology. No explanation beyond vague words like protocol and safety concern. The kind of language that hides bias behind procedure. Passengers exiting the plane stared as they passed her. Some curious. Some judgmental. Some pretending not to see her at all. She felt it then, not just embarrassment but something deeper. A familiar sting she had known since childhood. The quiet message that no matter how high she climbed, there would always be someone ready to question whether she deserved to be there. At the gate counter, a supervisor arrived. Polished smile. Corporate tone. He spoke about misunderstandings. About maintaining comfort for all guests. About how these situations were unfortunate. Unfortunate. As if she had spilled a drink. As if she hadn't just been publicly treated like an imposter in a seat she paid for. Her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a reminder. It was her legal counsel. They had seen the videos already spreading online. Passengers had posted everything: the confrontation, the escort, the walk of humiliation down the aisle. News outlets were beginning to call. The supervisor's expression shifted when he noticed the change in her posture. The calm had returned, but it was different now. Colder. Decisive. She asked one question. Was this airline confident in its decision? He nodded carefully. Policy had been followed. She held his gaze for a long second, then opened her email. Attached was the final authorization document for a $5 billion capital injection, funding her firm controlled. Funding this airline desperately needed to stay competitive in a brutal market. Her thumb hovered over the screen. In that silent airport corridor, surrounded by uniforms and fluorescent lights, the balance of power flipped. They had stripped her of dignity in front of strangers. Now she was about to strip them of something far more valuable. And with one calm, irreversible motion, she made her decision. The email was sent before the plane ever left the ground. Within hours, the funding was frozen. By the next morning, her firm released a formal statement citing ethical misalignment and discriminatory conduct as the reason for withdrawing $5 billion in capital support. The market reacted fast. Stocks dipped. Headlines spread. The same airline that had quietly escorted her off a plane was now issuing public apologies, launching internal investigations, and promising mandatory bias training. But for her, it was never just about revenge. It was about accountability. In interviews that followed, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't attack. She simply described what it felt like to be reduced from CEO to suspect in a matter of minutes. To have status, success, and proof still not be enough to override someone else's prejudice. She made one thing clear: money gave her leverage, but dignity should never require power to defend it. The incident sparked national conversations about racial profiling in corporate spaces. Other executives began sharing their own stories. Employees within the airline came forward anonymously, admitting the culture had allowed quiet bias to thrive for years. Policies changed. Leadership shifted. Training programs were implemented. But the deeper question remained. How many people have been humiliated in that same aisle, without billions behind their name? How many were escorted off planes, out of offices, out of opportunities, with no cameras rolling and no leverage to fight back? She returned to work the following week. Composed, focused, unshaken on the surface, yet changed. Because the real victory wasn't the $5 billion. It was the reminder that silence protects injustice and exposure forces change. The next time someone is told they don't belong, will there be consequences? Or will it take another public humiliation before the world decides enough is enough?